Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event. Today is World Press Freedom Day, and we'll be discussing the press freedom situation in Turkey. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Gulnoza. I'm the program coordinator for Europe and Central Asia at the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ. CPJ is an independent, non-governmental press freedom advocacy organization based in New York. We have two speakers today, Yahus Baidar and Merve Tahiroglu. I'll be introducing them in a minute. The event is organized by CEFTUS, and I'll be moderating it. Let me say a couple of words about the format first. We are planning to have 90 minutes or so for the entire event. Each speaker will have 15 to 20 minutes to speak. After that, we'll have a Q&A session. You can send your questions in the comments section as our speakers speak, and I will ask them to the speakers afterwards. At the end of today's session, I was told that we will have a photo from the event, as it is customary for CEFTUS, and I will ask all the participants who want to be in the photo to open their cameras, and those who don't want to be in the photo, close it. And this is something we will do at the end of the event. Before I go to introduce the speakers, I wanted to, and while we're still waiting for more people to join the event, I wanted to say a couple of words about CPJ and our work on Turkey. At the Committee to Protect Journalists, we've done research and advocacy on Turkey for as long as the organization has existed, since 1981. But it's the last few years that I want to focus on. The failed coup attempt of 2016 was a turning point for Turkey's media. But I wouldn't say that it shifted the dominant paradigm. The dominant paradigm, that is a system of thought, a system or a set of values in a society and in the political establishment. At CPJ, we saw the deterioration of press freedom in Turkey before the attempted coup of 2016, and the failed coup became the catalyst of the event, after which the trajectory was even clearer than before. The violations of rights of journalists and media outlets were so frequent that in March 2016, several months before the coup attempt, we at CPJ started a daily chronicle of press freedom violations, something we call Turkey Crackdown Chronicle. And we were adding inputs about different press freedom violations in Turkey, sometimes several incidents a day at the time. And then the second half of 2016 saw, as you know, a huge increase in press freedom violations, and the number of jailed journalists jailed for doing their job, skyrocketed. At CPJ, every December, we publish what we call prison census. It's a report about journalists detained or jailed for their work in all the countries of the world. Turkey has been one of the biggest jailers of journalists in recent years. In our prison census, it's number one or number two after China, but never lower than that. Although the number of jailed journalists cited by different press freedom organizations or human rights organizations vary, it is the mere fact that Turkey is one of the biggest jailers of journalists in the world, and we should focus on that and not just the head count, because the head count alone doesn't necessarily give a full picture of the press freedom environment. In addition to jailing critical journalists, Turkish authorities have used other tools to suppress press freedom and freedom of expression. My colleague who works in Turkey, on Turkey, often says that the Turkish media landscape used to be full of colors, and lately we see that very few colors are left. Recently, I had a meeting with a group of Istanbul-based journalists, and they told me mainstream media have been eliminated, wiped out. There are no mainstream media outlets left. Many independent media outlets have been shuttered in recent years. Others have been taken over by people who will not criticize the Erdogan government. Many journalists who served prison terms or who haven't been jailed were forced to flee Turkey. Now they live in exile abroad. And since eliminating many conventional media outlets that were critical of the authorities turned their attention to online media. So today we'll be focusing on conventional media and the internet, social media, and tech platforms that the authorities seem to be after in more recent years or months. So without further ado, I want to give the floor to our first speaker, Yahus Baidar, who is an award-winning journalist. He is editor-in-chief of Ahval, an independent online news outlet, and that has also podcasts in 3 languages. Since the attempted coup of July 2016, he's lived in exile in Europe. In 2013, Yavuz Baidar was among the co-founders of the independent media platform P24 that monitors the media sector and the state of journalism in Turkey. His opinion articles were published in The Guardian, Süddeutsche Zeitung, New York Times, El País, and many other international media outlets. In 2014, he was a fellow at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where he focused his research on self-censorship, corruption of ownership in Turkish media, state oppression, and threats to journalism in Turkey. And today he will focus on the state of the Turkish conventional media. Yavuz Bey, please, the floor is yours. And while you speak, our participants or guests should be able to leave their questions in the section in Zoom.
Thank you, Gulnoza Hanım. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone hears me. It feels great to be here, sharing some thoughts and analysis with you. Unfortunately, what is supposed to be a day of celebration, World Press Freedom Day, today leaves us from Turkey with no reason to be happy, no reason to be optimistic. For the sake of transparency, let me give you some additional information about myself. I am in exile, as you said, I would say a self-imposed one, since the summer of 2016, following the attempted coup and the announcement of the state of emergency. I had the clear instinct, even before these 2 events, that soon enough, we, the journalists and academicians in particular, would be the major targets by the regime, which proved to be true. And the attempted coup gave Erdogan government all the pretexts to tighten the screws by declaring the state of emergency 5 days later, July 20, which most people, including the main opposition party nowadays, agree was a very successful counter coup. Like many colleagues, Turk or Kurd, women or men, I have a standing arrest warrant dating back to August 2016. And to this day, neither I nor my lawyer, one of the most experienced jurists in Turkey, Fikret Ilkiz, was able to find out why. To give the reason why, authorities demand we surrender first. Given the Kafkaesque circumstances that ensue in Turkey, it would be, of course, a foolish step to do so, of course. Instead, many of us are engaged in what we are supposed to do, conduct journalism and inform the Turkish public by way of whatever venue we are able to find from Europe, mainly, or North America. Regardless of our different backgrounds and inclinations, what unites us abroad is the commitment to journalism and the free word. Today, Turkey, on the other hand, is an inferno with respect to freedom, independence, and plurality of the media. A republic of fear in an Orwellian sense, where the coverage of events and publication of reports and commentary, any stage of news production and news dissemination is a challenge. It's each step full of risks, like a minefield. I'd say that ever since the Gezi Park protests in 2013, June, July, Turkey under Erdogan in the context of media sector and journalism has become a true case study of major proportions, a laboratory of horror. But it is important to see the full picture. When we talk about the Turkish case, along with what was done to the media and journalism by the regime, it is also crucial to know what the journalists in Turkey did to themselves and the profession and the principles they were supposed to cherish. Blaming external factors is always justified, but easy, but self-critique is also called for, and it is the difficult part. That's why I think the title of the session, Oppression, Self-Censorship, Corruption, and Polarization, is very up to the point, very fitting. Some of my colleagues do not like some of these aspects mentioned. I worked about 14 years as news ombudsman, like the public editor, like the one in The Guardian, for example, and I belong to the very few that pointing to a spotlight, the critical lens to ourselves by taking a risk to be alienated and disliked by many of the colleagues, except perhaps the Kurdish colleagues who agree with me because I think they understand more. Freedom, editorial independence, pluralism, and diversity. All of these three pillars nearly collapsed in Turkey as of 2021. In the light of the title, let me walk you through these aspects one by one. Regarding freedom, journalists in Turkey today operate in an environment where the constitution de facto is suspended in terms of guarantees of people's right to be informed. Laws are hostile to the operations of reporting and comment. The judiciary, now subordinated to the palace, is instrumentalized for punishment of journalists, reporters, and critical media outlets, be that conventional or digital. As well known by now, arrests and endless lawsuits are daily reality, marking Turkey as a champion of arbitrary jailings and nightmarish, endless trials against dissidents. The imprisonments remain as a punitive measure. Today, at least 69 journalists are in jail, at least. Some figures are higher. Some of them have been kept more than 5 years behind bars, like Nedim Türfent, a Kurdish colleague, or Mehmet Baransu, a Turkish colleague, for what they have published, citing anti-terror laws, or for espionage, or attempting to overthrow the government. State censorship is a daily routine. Taboos, which more than a decade ago had been weakened, now are reinstated, and covering corruption, abuses of power by Erdogan and his close circles, the Kurdish issue, local human rights violations, state institutions, coverage of them, or discussing the Armenian genocide issue are some of those taboos. There are more, of course. Institutionalized oppression has led to a deepening culture of self-censorship, with the overwhelming majority of newsrooms operating as open-air prisons, preventing basic journalistic standards to be practiced. As Gulnoza mentioned in the beginning, some of my colleagues talk about the absence, lack of, or collapse of mainstream media. Mainly by that, they may have been meaning this one. Turkey remains not free in Freedom House rankings in 6 consecutive years since 2014. And according to Reporters Without Borders, RSF, it is the most updated index, 153rd out of 180 countries in 2020 World Press Freedom Index. Turkey has become, Erdogan's Turkey, of course, has become the most prolific transgressor at the European Court of Human Rights. It ranks first among the 47 Council of Europe member states concerning violations of freedom of expression in 2020. Of course, we know that media freedom is part of the freedom of expression domain. There are now growing signs that the government and the Supreme Court even defy some rulings by the European Court of Human Rights, which is a serious rupture. Having the properties of journalists seized has become a routine practice since late 2016 as well. It's a very serious, unlawful act, I would say. The number of Turkish journalists whose personal assets confiscated since 2016 amount to nearly 50. Since 2016, under the state of emergency, at least 190 media groups and outlets, including private news agencies, were shut down or seized. The digital archives of many of them were irreversibly deleted. This is an act of barbarism, in my opinion, because it's wiping out the memory, public memory. On digital media, Merve, following me, will go into this, but let me mention briefly that according to the Association for Freedom of Expression, İfade Özgürlüğü Derneği, 450,000 domains, 140,000 URL addresses, 42,000 tweets, and 11,000 YouTube videos were banned access in Turkey in the past 7 years. And these are the figures as of October 2020. There is also a new punitive measure applied by the government since July last year. I'm sure Merve will go into this. The authorities are busy removing content and impose access bans to those. The measure is employed so extensively that much of the news coverage, mainly on corruption and abuses of power, is wiped out for good. In other words, public memory, in another aspect, is systematically being deleted as we speak. Another punitive measure is continuous one, sackings. Arbitrary firings remain as an efficient method. Nearly 3,500 journalists have been sacked from Turkish media outlets. In the past 5 years, the number fired in 2020, last year, was 215. Job security of journalists have always been a chronically bleeding issue in Turkey. The rate of journalists who are members of trade unions is, fasten your seatbelts, only about 7 or 8%. 93 out of 100 journalists go without any union rights, unprotected, unshielded. This is important because along with ownership dimension, it helps us understand why self-censorship, out of fear of losing a job, losing income for living, has become part of the culture of Turkish journalism in the center field. But let me stick to censorship. Given the restructuralization of the state institutions, judiciary, and the solidified control of the content of the media as a whole, the palace has in many ways taken over the already existing restrictive administrative mechanisms and ownership grounds and established a successful conduct of censorship. The prime target is the TV domain, TV channels. UNESCO data leaves no doubt about countries like Russia, Egypt, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, etc. In those countries, nearly 9 out of 10 citizens get their news and comment from TV channels, mainly because they are free. So, as we have seen, Erdogan teams, Erdogan circles waste no time giving TV priority to control its output. State broadcaster TRT is now in full capture of the ruling power as an extension of it, but also private TV news channels tread extremely carefully to stick to official narrative. Radio TV Supreme Board, RTUK, RTUK as we call it, controlled also fiercely by the majority of the ruling power parties, AKP, unleashes a barrage of fines in cases of critical content whenever it appears. Only a handful small TV channels, some of them partisan, some of them not, try to operate as giving voice to the opposition segments. The rest has completely submitted to power. It would be no exaggeration to say that the public debate or public discourse, an absolute necessity for any democratic order, ceased to exist in Turkey. What you watch in those channels is a univocal cacophony of the participants in agreement always, or almost always, or in quasi-discussions about limited topics. Newspapers are in decline. Overall national circulation, which a decade ago was about 5 million plus, now has more than halved in the past couple of years. People, the young segments especially, read less and less. And in the center field media, the once traditional major dailies have all fallen prey to business families, which are total sycophants to the palace. Milliyet, Sabah, Hürriyet, etc. were also before owned by rather corrupt and greedy media proprietors and were to a great deal instrumentalized for their interests. But now the print is more than ever before tied to autocracy. The handful minor newspapers are on the left flank, and a couple of them are on the oppositional right nationalist flank. The problem, as with the lack of a proper public broadcaster, also the lack of a reference daily newspaper in Turkey. Cumhuriyet, which for long had the potential, a candidacy for being one, because it is structured as run by a foundation like The Guardian, has sadly fallen into the hands of a staunch nationalist, anti-Western clique of publishers and editors. It is, I would say, raging a discreet war against the Kurdish political movement and Gülenist segments and liberal reformist ones as well. And it has a very selective coverage of human rights issues. So when we look onto the conventional media sector, it is fair to say that more than 95% of it is, since 2019, approximately, under the direct or indirect control of the regime apparatus. This broad segment, due to massive oppression, corrupt ownership structures, and lack of journalist unions, constitute what I call a genetically modified media. This part of the media has lost whatever editorial independence it may have had in the past. So before concluding, let me highlight also a major game changer in favor of Erdogan and his power architecture on censorship in the past 2 years. This is very important to know or to be reminded of. The most important mechanism for the crippling of the media is the Directorate of Communications, İletişim Dairesi Başkanlığı, TIB. It was established 2 years after the attempted coup in July 2018. An expansive and rapidly growing department as it is, TIB operates as a subdivision of the palace. Its appointed president, reporting directly to Erdogan, draws propaganda and counter-propaganda strategies and combats fiercely all critical segments of conventional and digital media. Situated in Ankara in a 30-store tower with around at least 1,500 employees, possibly more, TIB enjoys total immunity from accountability by parliament. When, for example, recently Daily Cumhuriyet and Bir Gün reported about the unlawful construction in a garden of the director of TIB, Fahrettin Altun, he was engaged in his house slot, some extra building without consulting the law. A series of bans immediately and lawsuits were launched upon these newspapers, and successfully so. TIB's prime duty is to control the entire spectrum of the media on a daily basis and intervene whenever it sees due in the content of print and audiovisual sectors. TIB has tightened the control over the state broadcaster, TRT, and the official Anatolian agency, both already marked with a pro-government bias. Anatolian agency, as you may know or you may not, was directly labeled by French government most recently, a week ago actually, as a sheer propaganda tool. TIB oversees also the issuing of official national press cards to Turkish journalists and handles accreditation processes of domestic reporters and foreign correspondents as well, often using this as a carrot and stick element, depending on whether or not a certain journalist or correspondent is annoying with critical coverage or vice versa. It has been engaged to annul the press cards altogether to journalists based on their critical stance or ethical roots, Kurds. Recently, it was revealed that its president distributed to the TV channels a list of pundits as allowed to appear at the debate programs. The others were blacklisted. Another censorship mechanism is the Information and Communications Authority, BTK, but I leave it to Merve to explain. The fourth censorship tool, and that is the final one, State Advertising Authority, BIK, Basın İlan Kurumu, which oversees the official notices and adverts of the authorities to the print press. Since the attempted coup, the remnants of the critical and partisan press on the opposition flank have been facing systematic bans and blockages of state advertisements and making them, of course, bleed. They lose money, they lose income. And finally, to conclude with what self-harm we ourselves, Turkish journalists, did to our profession and to each other. Contrary to widespread belief and perceptions, the state of ruin of the state media, of the media, is not Erdogan's making only. To be fair, when he came to power, Turkey's strongman found the landscape of journalism quite ripe for his massive media engineering. He knew enough about the rotten core of media ownership, which began in the early 90s, and its systemic dirty dealings with the governments before him. He was aware also about the ideology-driven, fierce infighting and the lack of sophisticated wisdom on the value of professional solidarity among Turkey's polarized journalists. And he knew what to do and when to do it. He built on these fault lines, problematic laws, and he brought the proprietors to his side, conquered the judiciary, and succeeded. The ground, I would say, on which Turkish journalism rests is polluted by intolerance, taboos, and to a degree, infiltration of secret service elements in the newsrooms, and most important, polarization along ideological ethnic front lines. Quite a remarkable portion of journalist core is deployed on the notion that, quote, my political ideology or my inclination first, journalism comes second, it comes later, unquote. Quite a remarkable part of the newsrooms before was dominated by the sympathies for militarism, and coup culture. On the left flank, or on the Islamist side, the professional conduct was, and to a large degree remains, not as an end, but a means to taking over the power. The latter segment, the Islamist segment of the media, this proved to be true. Now that its camp is in power, it has now turned into a massive machinery of fake news and lies. So this sort of understanding, and I'm just going to end here soon, this sort of understanding, I would say, which instrumentalized the profession as a missionary tool, has caused serious problems as means, not as an end, a professional conduct. The most important outcome was, and still is, the indifference. Shut the fuck up! When the oppression hits seen as an ideological adversary. A Kemalist segment, for example, ignores the solidarity is subjected to punishment. Or a leftist segment may even applaud when a liberal segment is bashed. The latest example is the outrage when the 71-year-old former editor Ahmet Altan, after 4.5 years, based on bogus charges, was released. His stepping to freedom enraged the Kemalist, nationalist, and Islamist colleagues who united in crucifying him for what he published once in Daily Taraf. Polarization was such that some colleagues seem happy if a Kurdish liberal or Gülenist colleague sits in jail in eternity. It blinds many of them to distinguish between the laws of cruelty, the crime on one hand, and the ethics and professional misdemeanor on the other. Journalism first, pluralism and exchange of the free opinion a necessity, competition a must. These mottos must be accepted by all parts if we want a solid sector. So internal polarization, also nested in some major domestic journalist organizations, is a bleeding sore that keeps the Turkish media vulnerable. In conclusion, the question, is there a way out of this quagmire, this conundrum? Turkey has adopted via very murky referendum an ultra-presidential system in 2017, which places a thick layer of tar over freedoms. Only after a possible abolishment of this system, presidential system, and a return to the rule of law will pave the way to better conditions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It was very interesting, a very detailed analysis, and it's good to hear you outline the censorship institutions, the state agencies that conduct the function of censors in the Turkish society today. And I already have a few questions to ask you, and I see a couple of questions from the participants. Please feel free to send them in the chat section. You can post them to everyone or to me directly if you don't want your name to be read out. And I want to now give an opportunity to Merve Tahiroglu to speak on the internet, the control of the internet and social media. Merve is Turkey Program Coordinator at Project on Middle East and Democracy. Prior to joining these organizations, she was a research analyst at the Washington-based think tank Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where she focused her research on Turkey's domestic policies, foreign policy, and relationship with Washington. Merve's articles on Turkey appeared in various media outlets such as Foreign Affairs, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, Foreign Policy, Politico, The Huffington Post. She was born and raised in Istanbul. She earned her master's degree from Georgetown University and her bachelor's degree from in political science from Duke University. Merve, please, the floor is yours.
I think the microphone.
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you so much, Gulnoza, for that great introduction. And also I want to start off by thanking Self-censorship for having this very important panel on this day with Turkey. Yavuz painted such a comprehensive picture of the state of the repression of journalism and media in Turkey. And that, you know, as at POMED, we work on democracy, democratization, and human rights. And of course, journalism and free media is one of the most important pillars of a democracy. It's one of the most important ways we ensure accountability, put power to accountability, and to create alternative information and criticism of policies, and create any sort of political debate in any country, and to ensure that there is some shared understanding of truth and civil debate around it. And this is one of the biggest problems that I would say that Turkish democracy is facing today. When Yavuz and I originally talked about the structure, how to structure this talk, I said I wanted to talk about the digital space, because most of the things that he was mentioning earlier in terms of the repression is taking place in the digital place online in Turkey. And that's because Turkey is a super digitalized society, more so than I think many people who don't know much about Turkey would expect. Something like 3/4, so 75% of the population has access to the internet in Turkey. Mainly this is through cell phones. Most people in Turkey actually own cell phones. They're easily accessible smartphones, and they can reach the internet through their smartphones. A very high number of people, around 64% of people, are actively social media users, which means they have social media accounts that they access daily. And I think one of the most important things is that increasingly, when we look at opinion polls and studies, people report that social media and the internet is the main way they reach the main source for them for political information and for the news. So nobody's really reading the newspapers anymore. And I think, traditional media outlets are very powerful still in the digital space, which I will explain now. And I think that that's very important, particularly those with television channels. And television is still, I think, the top source of news consumption in Turkey. But most people also access those numbers can be skewed because most people also follow those outlets online through their laptops and smartphones. So I think we have to look at the space and the kinds of opportunities that the space offers in light of everything that you just explained, and also how it is a new place of contestation for politics and culture in Turkey now, and for the hearts and minds of the Turkish people. And that's just, I guess, a nice way of saying that the government's and the ruling elite's attempts to, I think, homogenize Turkish society. So I want to explain it. So I will start with a bit of problematic bad news, which is that the model of traditional medias and pro-government or government-owned or pro-government media's dominance in of traditional news outlets that Yavuz laid out is replicated online. When we look at studies, we see that most Google searches of news in Turkey in Turkish yield results to the same dominant news outlets that we're used to. So things like if somebody looks up what happened in the news yesterday in Turkey about protest, for example, the top 3 results that they will receive on Google will be outlets like Sabah, Habertürk, so already ones that are dominant in terms of ownership, and are, as Gulnoza also said at the beginning, there's no such thing as mainstream media, but I call all traditional media mainstream media at this point, and they're all, one voice saying the same thing, which is mainly propagating the government's own information. The same model is what appears when people go online and search for the news on their cell phones and on their on the internet. However, this is also a very important space because unlike the actual traditional media space, at least online we see the allowance of an alternative media to exist. And I don't want to minimize the importance of this, even though still even online, the most dominant media that we're seeing are pro-government and owned by these same handful of outlets that really dominate the space online and offline. It's very important that the internet allows alternative news sources to exist in Turkey and to reach Turkish people, however difficulty. And for that, social media is one of the most important things. And again, 64% of people are on social media. In fact, Turkey ranks among the top 15 countries where people spend the most amount of time in their day on social media, and that's where they get most of their news. And social media does not necessarily replicate this model that I just mentioned with Google. One caveat is that YouTube, which is the most popular website in Turkey and social media application in Turkey, which is owned by Google, actually does replicate this model, unfortunately, and some studies show that YouTube's algorithm often takes viewers to pro-government dominated news accounts content eventually, but with that caveat that this is not true for Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, which are the next after YouTube, and TikTok, which are the most important and highly used social media accounts, platforms in Turkey. So between these and other blogs that exist online, which can be considered as part of social media outlets, there is a lot of alternative information that is available in Turkish to Turkish users, even though it's not as dominant as we would like them to be. And this says something about democracy on the digital democracy and how democracy works on Google and the internet space. But I think the mere fact that these platforms exist and are allowed makes a huge difference. And in fact, in Turkey, this is a very vibrant space, and it grew in reaction to the media dominance through ownership that President Erdogan started back in the mid-2000s. And I think in 2004, the purchase of the Sabah ATV media company, which was one of the big media companies in Turkey, but with that falling under President Erdogan's business cronies, we started seeing really high pressure on journalists who were critical of the government. Yavuz walked us through that. He looked at the last few years, but I would really start it. It really started back in 2004 or 5 when it got really bad. And that's when we started seeing the first independent outlets in Turkey start emerging online. T24, T24 was one of the first ones, and it created a alternative source of discourse around the news, around the political elite, that journalists and traditional newspapers and the TV were already finding it increasingly hard to express these opinions because of self-censorship, because of this ownership structure. So I think it's really important that the internet has allowed outlets like T24, Bianet. We have many examples, Duvar in Turkey, Medyascope, these outlets that exist online and are still independent and critical news sources. This also allows media in exile, Yavuz is an example of them, and Ahval is an example of them, media in exile in Turkey, to also put out alternative content to what we're seeing in pro-government dominated mainstream media, and try to reach some Turkish speakers online digitally, even if they are blocked through VPN. It's very important that this space is out there, because this is how any kind of accountability can happen in Turkey. So with that, I want to bring us to the unfortunate side of things. Because of the importance of this digital space and the existence of these outlets, of course, this invites, we have an authoritarian regime in Turkey, so this invites a lot of repression, which is very similar to what's happening offline. But the way I see it is there's 3 stages to this. One is monitoring, heavily monitoring, and directing state resources towards the heavy monitoring of the digital space, which is easier to do. I gave YouTube as a caveat of maybe not necessarily having the most democratic model of news sources, but one caveat to that caveat is that YouTube videos are also much more difficult to censor, for example, because they're not written information. They're not written. So there's always opportunities where we also have repression. I want to keep repeating that because, again, I want to keep emphasizing that in spite of all this repression, we have to see digitalization as an opportunity in Turkey, because it is quite a vibrant space, and even if they're not dominant, these outlets and these voices do exist online. So they are under heavy monitoring, and this happens through multiple government agencies, but it also happens through informal networks, mainly networks that work as government troll accounts, not only engage in trolling in social media, for example, but also will we see some very scary reports of informal networks of people, government loyalists who are lurking in the online space, trying to keep tabs on people and report them to the police. But of course, the police counter-terror unit itself boasts that it is heavily monitoring social media. They said the last number that I saw was that they said they were monitoring 40. I just noted this down. They were monitoring 46 million accounts. I mean, that's pretty much all social media accounts. That's all Facebook accounts plus Twitter accounts plus Instagram accounts in Turkey. So 45 million, I'm sorry, not 46. I'm sure since 2018 it has become 40. It has exceeded 46. So basically anyone who goes online knows that their tweets and Instagram posts and TikTok videos, etc., are being monitored. Given this situation, I think the fact that so much criticism of the government and its policies exist online, again, I don't want to sound so optimistic, but it is the World Press Freedom Day, so I want to have a few positive comments here that, you know, Turkish people are not all under this influence, although it is a very scary tactic of repression. The monitoring aside, and what happens as a result of the monitoring is that both it creates huge self-censorship among large populations, and it creates, if people want to criticize a certain policy of the government, instead of doing that, and this is true for journalism as well, if they want to criticize the government at all, they will think twice before doing it. If journalists want to share a piece of news, they will think twice before putting that on social media. This is the actual impact that it has, tangible impact that it has, but also a lot of people will get, this is one of the biggest pressure tactics that we're seeing, will get taken into custody because of their social media posts, and then they will take them to the police station and they will have to spend a couple of hours there, and the police will interrogate them, and then they will be sent home, and perhaps they won't even be jailed, and it'll only be a couple of hours at the police station, but that harassment itself alone is a very much a successful government tactic of imposing self-censorship on the citizenry, knowing that this could happen to them, this kind of harassment can happen to them anytime. And of course, then we have the worst cases where a lot of people do get jailed and convicted because of their social media posts. This includes journalists, but it also includes Turkey's highest profile political detainees. Almost all of them are under trial, under criminal investigation, or convicted because of their social media activities. Osman Kavala, the biggest, Turkey's most prominent philanthropist and civil society leader, for example, is tried alongside Can Dündar, another very important Turkish journalist in exile because of his reporting in Turkey. They have a joint case, a mass case coming up just next month called the Gizzy Trial. Basically, we have a mass group of people, including journalists, citizens, civil society leaders, all being tried under the absurd claim that they instigated mass protests against the government using social media, using Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. We have Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu, a prominent pro-human rights lawmaker, opposition lawmaker, who was just jailed because of social media posts. The main opposition party leaders are constantly under criminal investigations for their social media posts, being accused of either sympathizing with a terrorist organization or instigating trouble or insulting, and this is one of the most important, one of the worst laws that is being used to crack down on freedom of expression today, insulting President Erdogan. And of this, there are tens of thousands of cases where people are being accused of insulting Erdogan personally and his office. This is one of the worst tactics that we're seeing. One last thing which is that I want to explain about this repression that we're seeing in the digital space is, alongside the monitoring and the policing that is being done in social media, just like he did with traditional media by buying and getting his cronies to buy up the major traditional news networks in Turkey. President Erdogan and his followers are also very much invested in co-opting the digital media space and these social media companies. Among the most loudest people, most active people on these platforms that I listed, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and now increasingly Clubhouse, this new app, are usually government loyalists and sometimes just followers, political followers of the government, but also, according to some, again, very disturbing reports, many paid trolls of the government that are, professionally paid to be in this space and to harass critics and to label critics and to follow them and to keep propagating the government's message. I think that's one of the most important examples that we can look at, because it shows just how powerful social media can be, that just censoring it and just policing it is not enough for the government. They also need to dominate it. They also need to co-opt it, because ultimately you can't really shut down the entire internet. I mean, you can, but I think that would be quite disastrous for Turkey if they attempted to do that. And it's very important. These are very important sources of alternative information. And one of the recent talking points of the government was that they suggested, for example, following the Chinese model and creating a Turkish, native Turkish social media platform to bring citizens away from Silicon Valley platforms and TikTok and onto this platform to further increase government control. And so just the fact that this idea is thrown out there and is being discussed just shows, again, how powerful social media can be and why the government is trying to co-opt this as a tactic and as a weapon for its own, to escalate its own repression on citizens. I think the ultimate goal of all of this is to destroy any sense of accountability. And just this weekend, something happened, and I want to share this as an anecdote, my closing anecdote, before we can go on to questions, because I'm sure there will be many, is that recently on Friday, the head of the Turkish police published this sort of decree, this document saying that, telling police officers in Turkey that they have the right to stop people, citizens or journalists, from recording them with their cell phones if there is any kind of abuse when they are carrying out an arrest, or if they're at a protest, or if they're doing anything on duty. Basically, they said that this falls under your privacy, and so you can prevent citizens from recording any of this. Now, we all know, and I live in the United States of America, so I know how important it is that citizens are able to record and put anything online, because this is what accountability looks like, and how we get any kind of information. So when this police director issued this statement, a lot of civil society members immediately said that, although this will prevent journalists from, literally prevent journalists from doing their job, and they said, don't worry, nothing will happen. The next day was May Day, and there were labor unions protesting, of course, protesting and celebrating May Day, and there were some confrontation between police officers, and there was clear instances of police abuse on the protesters, and two separate journalists who tried to record them received abuse themselves, the police violence themselves. In one case, the police officer took the cell phone and threw it on the ground and started stomping on it, and said, don't you know that you're not allowed to do this because of the new decree? You're not allowed to record this and put it online. All these people can do, these are journalists, all they can do is to make other Turkish citizens aware of what is going on with their government and the state apparatus. It's not, they can't actually, none of these protesters can hurt the police or hurt the government. All they're doing is to try to make other people informed. And when this is the kind of repression that they're facing, it removes a core principle of democracy and pillar of democracy. And I just wanted to share that anecdote because I think it's really sad that it came also right on the heels of this day when we were supposed to be celebrating. But of course, the picture is so grim that unfortunately, I thought there was no better story to end this little speech with.
Well, thank you very much, Merve. The picture is really grim. I agree. And as Yavuz Bey, and you spoke, I couldn't help but draw parallels between Turkey and Russia and a number of other countries with autocratic regimes like Belarus, Azerbaijan, and Central Asian countries, because I cover those countries at CPJ. And Turkish authorities have used similar tactics to suppress free media and press freedom. As I said at the beginning, throwing out journalists to jail and then forcing them out of Turkey into exile and trying to block them on social media, and now trying to control the internet even more. I'm also thinking that Turkey is just a few steps behind Russia. And I always watch Turkey with the concern, is it going to catch up to Russia? Are we going to see Turkey in the same shape as we see Russia today? I still find Russia more repressive, although there are a lot of very brave journalists in both countries working and doing a great job despite all the difficulties and risks to their life and well-being. So what can be done to ensure that Turkey is not on the same path as Russia? What can be done to change this situation? I guess my question is to both speakers.
Merve, you first.
It's a very hard question, but I mean, for me, the most important recommendation to the international community, since we currently have an international community of audience, would be to support civil society networks in Turkey that are trying to create alternative media sources, alternative information, and employ journalists who have been sacked because of government repression, creating so people who are working on the space, and people also who, organizations like fact checkers who help combat disinformation and fake news in the Turkish online space. I think supporting these organizations and these networks is the most important thing, because again, their existence is what gives me hope that Turkey can go back on a path of democratization at some point when there is political change. And so in order to ensure that, I think we have to create a sustainable model where this reality exists and these sources exist and these people can continue to help create some sort of transparency and accountability and free independent information in Turkey.
Responding to this question, I think one should, as I've been doing for some time, look into technical possibilities, what can be done, and also the media culture in Turkey. I mean, audience, as I mentioned in my presentation, TV is the most important one. It's in terms of voter patterns in any upcoming elections, given the condition that these elections will be fair and transparent, will be the TV channels and also radio. The regime is fully aware of this, and it keeps in the TV channels, even on the opposition flank, and many of them are partisan, either with the main opposition CHP or close to the E party of Meral Akşener. Domestically, I think there's not much to do, but as I've been telling some European colleagues and politicians in the past 2-3 years, I think it is important to invest on journalists investing on TV channels and radios, some sort of joint TV channel. And my proposal was also, when the bulk of academicians left Turkey because they were petitioners for the peace communique in 2015-16, again, the idea was to establish a joint university, sort of European Turkish university. And also regarding the media, I think this idea, just in terms of practicalities, I think it may make a difference at radio, television, you know, 24/7, basically. What we do, for example, as Ahwal or some other outlets outside, as sort of exile media, diaspora media, alternative media, whatever you may want to call it, from abroad, is regardless of its powerful content, it is online, it is internet. And I think television is different. It's satellite dishes, and it is not enough that major public broadcasters in Turkey, in Europe, BBC or Deutsche Welle, you know, French television doesn't even have these languages, but these two, for example, it's not enough that they have you know, 10-15 minutes of broadcasting every day. It needs to be continuous. It needs to be editorially fully independent, supported and endorsed by the, you know, democratic governments of the European Union. I think that's the least one can do. I've been repeating this idea to whoever I meet and tell them that this should be the way to go.
Thank you. And now I want just to go to a question from the audience. There is a question from Greece. They're asking about this person from Turkey they met who is a teacher, but used to be a journalist and stopped working as a journalist because her articles were not welcomed anymore. It actually is similar to what I hear from Turkish journalists. Recently, I spoke to someone and she told me that someone younger approached her and said, should I, you know, work on becoming or study on becoming a journalist? And she said, no, just go do something else. So there is also this concern that there are people who are leaving the industry, the profession, but also that not many young people are entering it. And what can be done about that?
I think again, this is in part, I mean, it's mainly because of the state of Turkish media that we're seeing this phenomenon you're talking about. Journalists just nobody wants to be a journalist because nobody wants to be jailed. And we have a massive brain drain and exodus of young people anyway who don't want to live in Turkey because of just how bad the economy is. And that's what happens again in authoritarian systems where young people don't have opportunity and unemployment is in double digits for people with college graduate degrees, and they can't find employment. There's a huge brain drain, and that's a massive problem itself. The fact that journalists don't want to work in Turkey is another, and can't and just don't want to deal with this the sector and the pressure on this sector is a major problem. But I think there's also this broader phenomenon of particularly young people just don't really care for traditional ways of media consumption. And so I think I totally hear what Yavuz is saying. I think, yeah, television is the most important thing. Every household television is on all the time in Turkey. So that's the way to reach people if you really wanted to constantly broadcast the same message to a large households. But also when we look at Generation Z, which is not, I mean, Turkey does have a young population. Generation Z and X, or well, people under 35 do end up accounting for about half the voters and it will, about half the voters when we come to the next election in 2023. And for these people, YouTube and TikTok are where they're at. They're not really, that's where they're trying to get their news consumption in 2-minute videos, not really by turning on the television and listening to a 4-hour Turkish news discussion show, which is really the biggest dominance of the government's media. So I think, again, as citizen journalism, that concept grows, and social media becomes a more important platform for young voters, I think there will be more opportunities. Like Ahval, I mean, Artı TV is another one I can think of, is led by Turkish and Kurdish German citizens in Germany, and they broadcast through the one on Twitter, so Periscope, I think, and I know that podcasters often use Spotify. So there's always new apps and platforms that people can find. It's important that we support them as a whole, and I think hopefully if we can find better ways to reach younger audiences, I think that hopefully will have a ripple effect when it comes to broader elections as well.
This pattern you described is Gulnoza, in the question is quite common. A lot of people have this fatigue of continuing to work as editors or reporters, and it has, of course, this external circumstance that leads them to that, because of the unemployment, because of editorial dependence, not independence, and also I think the decline of quality. Journalism is a teamwork. It's as opposed to academia. An academic is basically a lone wolf, more or less. I mean, focusing and deepening into some subject. But every day the newsroom activity, newspaper, take a television channel or internet. It's the teamwork. What we do online, for example, even that we work in different time zones in online activity or while online, but we need this team to work, and we need this team to be operating on qualified grounds, so that we speak the same language, we have this shorthand language, etc. What lacks, I think, what we see is, and I've been noting this with sadness, is the constant declining standards of conduct in Turkish newsrooms. The more, and I would blame, of course, mainly the media proprietors on this one in the past quarter of a century, including also the regimes. But what they did was basically to pollute the newsrooms into subordinating the major editors into serving their own business interests, or forcing them to self-censorship, and closing down investigative journalism, investigative reporting sections or departments, whatever they may be, because they didn't want, and they still don't want, they would never want coverage of corruption. So the more corrupted the media has become in the past 25 years, even before Erdogan and his team took over, the more difficult Turkish journalism, the more difficulties Turkish journalism has met in reaching the truth and sharing it with the public, with the audience. And this has already started. This erosion has started at the end of the past decade, even at the end of the 1990s. Of course, the massively geometrically increasing oppression during the second decade of the AKP meant that people who had absolutely no idea about what the social role of journalism was entered the newsrooms with no experience, just with the basic mission of serving the power's interests. So a lot of people in herd and in flocks left, and this means, as much as it's a teamwork journalism, it's also a school. You learn how to make a movie by going to a movie theater, where you watch movies and you watch them, and you understand what it's all about. If you are clever enough, you learn how the craft of that. In newsroom is a school. You learn by communicating on daily basis with your seniors, and those seniors are no longer. They are not there. Some of them have left completely, and as Merve mentioned, now this generation of ours, maybe the generation before me, is basically practically gone. What the young generations will do, they will not do anything to do anything with the conventional media, not as much as what they will want to do with the non-conventional media, with the digital media. And we haven't seen any clear indications of what possibilities and what potentials they will be seeing in an oppressed environment like Turkey's, because what they see is basically intimidation. Whatever they try, and because they see possibilities. With Clubhouse, they saw some possibilities, but they were intimidated and they abandoned it now. And there are other parts they try to do with the Mesopotamia Agency, for example, the news agency. They use or small groups of journals posting on social media, but they do it with fear. But I think they are in search mode now, and something will come out of that. But I don't know what. I cannot figure out the shape of what they will do. But unfortunately, these sort of well-knowledged, insightful senior editors are gone from the mainstream media.
Thank you. Next question is also from a participant. Thank you very much for your valuable insight. Apart from legislative actions and political pressure, is there any financial tools that Erdogan adopts to undermine media independence? Oh, I think, Yavuz Bey, you touched upon it a little bit when you spoke about advertising and such, but maybe you can expand a little bit.
I think question implies additional funding sources to intimidate and oppress the media. I think Merve was into this, for example, in digital media. What sorts of sources are allocated to engage people on the side of or in service of the government, right, Merve?
Yeah, this is I'm not quite clear on the question, but this is how the government...
The question is more about what financial tools Erdogan is using to suppress free media.
Financial tools, I mean, one of them, again, I think it would be, I would say that the top way this is done is through ownership and levying, using the judiciary to intimidate news networks and journalists with fines. I think fines are among the most common ways that they repress, and to censor, of course, directing all state apparatus into the monitoring and policing of particularly the digital space. So, I mean, that's basically the biggest use of financial power. But also, again, we see very disturbing reports of troll farms. We see people on the payroll of the government that are in Turkish online space, but also English language, all around the Balkans. I've seen examples of this, spreading disinformation and government propaganda. The most, legal, let's say, and unproblematic way that the government does this is through the state agency, TRT, as Yavuz mentioned. It's no coincidence that this agency's international network has grown immensely just in the last 10 years, because they're pouring a lot of resources into making TRT World into an Al Jazeera of sorts of Turkey, and to reach a broad international audience that will subscribe to primarily President Erdogan's worldview, not just about his governance of Turkey, and not to develop an international audience just for his vision and get their backing for his vision for Turkey, but also his vision of the international stage of Turkey, the Middle East relations with the West, for what kind of a force NATO is in the world, how much of a threat ISIS actually presents to the world, to the international community, to the Club of Democracies, all of this worldview. So the expansion of TRT's international broadcasting, I think, is one expression of how much the government is willing to invest in propagating and investing in this hearts and minds, or in other words, social manipulation tactics. So I think looking after those networks is also very important in terms of the international aspect of this repression through, I think, disinformation and manipulation of international media.
Also, I think this aspect, if I understand the question right, we can speak about how the money is used actually to undermine the basic pillars of whatever remained of Turkish journalism through the lens, through the optics of ownership structures and media ownership's relations with the powers since early 1990s. We see two patterns here following each other. First pattern was these powerful capital owners, the proprietors that entered into the Turkish media sector in late 1989, 1991, 92, after the deregulation of the media, actually 1992, they suddenly realized the sort of power of the television, and they started, building their empires, competing fiercely, severely with each other, like Bilgin Group or Doğan Group and other groups. And what they did was to build banks and channel as much money as possible to enforce and enhance their media groups, to build a sort of areas of influence. They really wanted to become, and they became, kingmakers or kingbreakers in Turkish politics, especially playing really nasty games with the weak coalition governments. And they used this one to the very extreme, and to such an extreme that Turkish economy basically collapsed due to other factors as well in the end of the 1990s. What changed after the entry of Erdogan and AKP government, and that's, I think, the most destructive part of it, with the media proprietors as main actors, is that the more aggressive Erdogan government became to take over these some parts of these media groups. It actually began with Uzan, a group, before the other groups in 2003, I think. And Erdogan basically inserted a new behavior. He was saying, okay, I give you these public tenders, I will give you these favors, these favors, these favors, construction, etc., to a certain business person, but you will have to buy this newspaper. You will also have to own this TV channel. Put money in them. And what they did was basically, pro-government, mainly Islamist or hugely conservative business people entered into the sector, took over, and what they did was basically, because they knew even less about the social role of the journalism, they started, how should one say it, empty out the content inside, bleed out these media groups, replacing the professionals with their own staff. So what happened to newspapers like Vatan, to a degree, Sabah initially, and then it speeded up, and Milliyet and Hürriyet, all of these sort of flagship newspapers was basically undermined already, and TV channels as well, through the funding of these business persons, business people encouraged by Erdogan. So we saw a huge destruction actually since I would say 2005, 2006 up to now. And we have, as my title of my article today is we have a wreck now, we have a wreckage, we have a ruin. We don't have those newspapers. Those newspapers used to sell, for example, 350,000, 400,000. They sell now 20,000, 30,000 because of this destruction. It's done already. So there's not much left to do to fund actually for destructive behavior, I would say.
Thank you. There is a question about a lot of fake accounts on social media, for example, on Twitter, that are probably linked to Turkish authorities. I think Merve touched upon that already. And I really want to go back to one of the most important issues. Whenever anybody is talking about press freedom environment in Turkey, the question of a huge number of jail journalists comes up, and this is just a number one theme, because it reflects the situation, the very dire situation, and as we said, both of us, Yahus Baidar, that the numbers may differ, but still they are intense, and some organizations see very much higher numbers. And then you mentioned that some journalists have been in jail for longer than 5 years, Nedim Turfan, Mehmet Baransu. And, you know, I recently found out that one female journalist, Hatice Duman, has been in jail since 2003, and she was sentenced to life in prison, which makes her the longest imprisoned female journalist in the world. Because you know, we have some journalists in Ethiopia who've been jailed since 2001, but she is the longest imprisoned journalist, a woman. And then we started trying to get information what happened to her, especially because there was this decision that her rights were violated during the trial procedure. So if anybody from the audience can share any information about her, please do with me, because I'm really keen to get some latest updates on her. But the question is, what can be done to get those journalists released, especially journalists who've been in jail for so long? And according to some reports, some of them have stayed in jail despite serving a full sentence. So what can be done? And then the question that's linked to it, what are the main parties that can put enough pressure on the Erdogan government? Is it the EU? Is it the US? Is it any international organization? How can the Erdogan government can be influenced?
Yes, Merve.
Would you like to talk, or I have a, I mean, look, the main problem with, and this is a really big deal, because even if you have one journalist in jail, this should be a big deal in any country, and certainly in a country like Turkey that, you know, still today Erdogan likes to pretend that he's a democrat and try to sell himself to the world as a democratic leader. And so I think that he cares about this veneer democracy. It's for such a system to have even one journalist in jail should be unacceptable. The main problem is that President Erdogan himself says, and unfortunately his government ministers, including the justice minister, will be the first ones to say that none of these people are in jail for their journalism. They're in jail for their activities supporting terrorism, for engaging in terrorist propaganda, for insulting the state, etc. The problem with this entire statement and mindset is that no policy can be criticized. I mean, it defies the entire existence of the profession of journalism and the concept of journalism to say that, to tell people who, when a Turkish journalist goes and interviews a member of a militant group that Turkey is at war with and publishes that interview, and the government says this effectively makes the journalist into a propagandist for the terrorist group. I think this is the biggest challenge to the concept of journalism and information and democratic governance and accountability in Turkey, that citizens equate that behavior not with creating an alternative story or a side to a very complex problem that leads to human lives destruction. They don't see it in that way, but they see it as propaganda on behalf of a terrorist organization. And this normalizes in the minds of the people looking at the situation question the jailing of any journalist, because they fundamentally, even though Turkey's own constitution has many lines in there saying that journalists should not be hindered from doing their job and they should be free to report, even though you have those clauses, you have such bad anti-terrorism and libel and insulting the state, the flag, the language, you cannot insult anything in Turkey, or you cannot criticize anything which can be considered an insult. And again, I look at the US Constitution and the First Amendment and how important it is to be able to criticize your president, to be able to insult your president. I mean, this is American citizens are proud of having the freedom to be able to insult their government and their president. That is freedom. That is a democracy. I mean, this is why I think the main problem, sorry I went on this rant, but the problem is Turkey's very, very harsh and laws, criminal laws and anti-terrorism laws that defy all of the conventions that Turkey is party to, whether it's the UN Convention or the European Convention on Human Rights, that are supposed to guarantee the freedom of expression. And this is the main, I think, obstacle to journalism and the jailing of journalists. So the first thing that needs to be done is that those laws need to be repealed or amended inside Turkey in order to be able to ensure that. Second, the courts need to push back against prosecutors and police bringing up such cases based on social media activity, based on journalistic activity, which can be considered anything, I think, as long as it fits the standards of journalistic integrity. Any kind of reporting should fall under that law, that guarantee, whether or not it insults anybody. And so these are the things that need to be changed in Turkey. And I think, so you asked, is it the EU, is it the US to put more pressure on this? I think, given that Turkey is a major party to the European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention of Human Rights, it is the duty of your Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights to levy however many sanctions they can until Turkey starts implementing the European Convention on Human Rights and release these journalists.
As I mentioned, I had some concrete proposals on television channels and radio, etc. I have also very clear, and I've been thinking about this for a while, and I share these ideas, and I have also concrete proposals on this one. Gulnoza, this will continue. These jailings will continue, and I am afraid this will be, we are still at the rosy days. As the Turkish crisis deepens, and I know my colleagues, some parts of my colleagues, especially the Kurdish colleagues and some parts of the Turkish colleagues, they will not give up. They will continue. And this battle will go on, but the measures will be harsher, because history teaches us that if a regime gets squeezed into a corner, it becomes more and more vicious. This is the vicious circle. But I think, given this fact, that there are things to be done. I think first, if Biden administration means serious business with promoting democracy, it should also have the insight of reinforcing media activities in all of those endangered half democracies or emerging democracies where the development is arrested, basically it's stopped and reversed. So part of this pledge should be also enforcing the media in whatever country it aims to promote democracy for. I think it is very, very important that CPJ and other bodies remind the Biden administration of this aspect. This is serious funding and serious investment if it means serious business. But also, I think, again, I share this idea with my colleagues in Reporters Without Borders, but also on some newspapers in Europe. And this applies also to North American countries like Canada, United States. We have this number of jail journalists, 69 now, and it should be maybe more, or it could be more. I propose them, especially with these RSF or CPJ as tools, as platforms, as coordinators or interlocutors that, for example, given a country, Canada, and Western Canada, a city, a municipality adopts a certain journalist in jail in Turkey, Mr. X or Mrs. Y, and through the local media follows the story of this specific jail journalist day after day after day, keeping the flame up. In another community, in a small town in Spain, or in a city of Greece, as, say Thessaloniki, adopts a certain jail journalist and follows his or her case through the media, through city hall meetings, through reminders, day after day after day, so that all these people do not feel lonely. They know that some people out there, some civil society, somewhere in Europe, in North America, in some democracies, basically care for them, follows their case, and makes it public and shares it with the world. I think that's now at least what we can do about these people. And I said, I'm afraid there will be more, and this can be something that may keep the awareness alive, and their stories cannot get lost, so that we don't remember them once in 365 days in World Press Freedom Day.
No, it happens more often than that. I assure you. We're always in touch with the EU institutions. I have a colleague who works in Brussels, and also with the folks in Washington. I have a colleague who works just in Washington advocacy, and it's great to see that there is a lot of awareness about press freedom environment and wider human rights situation in Turkey among policymakers. And I love your idea, about raising awareness on a grassroots level, not just on a very high policymakers level or government officials level. We did in the past this twinning project when we twinned, meaning we made like twins between a member of the European Parliament and the Turkish journalist who was in jail at the time. So the MEP, a member of the European Parliament, would always have their twin and in any events or elsewhere would mention them and raise awareness about very particular cases. And I think that helped our cause, but otherwise we have regular contacts. And it's very difficult to put pressure on the Erdogan regime. And it's great that people like yourself try to, well, first of all, continue working, which is not very easy to continue working in journalism and in research after being forced into exile. And I also want to compliment all the journalists in Turkey who continue working despite all the risks to their life and well-being. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to ask all the questions that came from the participants. We're already beyond the time for today, and we'll be taking a picture. So please prepare to be in the photo. If you want to, open your cameras, and our colleagues from Seftus will take a picture. But if you want to continue this engagement, you're very welcome to reach out on Twitter and ask questions either in messages or tagging any of us. I'm open to that, and I'm always open to have any sort of communication on Turkey, especially if you have any information, as I said, about some of the journalists in jail. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Yavuz Bey and Merve. It was great to have this event. And now I think it's...
Can I say one more thing? There was a question about from a colleague, Turkish colleague, saying that, my speech is, modified version of what I published in Ahval English today. This is a modified version. I may publish it in other venues as well. So it's found in Ahval News Online today in English.
This is great. So now say cheese, I guess. Do we have a picture yet? Huse? Okay. Well, thank you so much again, and please keep up the great work you've been doing.
Thank you, Gulnoza.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you both and everyone.